Every morning, you wake up in a warm bed, reach for your smartphone to check the time, and walk to the bathroom where you turn a faucet and receive clean, hot water. You brush your teeth with fluoride toothpaste, take a hot shower with fragrant gel, eat fresh food from the refrigerator, and head to work in heated transportation. All of this seems so natural and ordinary that we rarely think about what an incredible miracle this is by the standards of human history. But what if one morning you woke up not in your cozy bedroom, but in a small, smoke-filled hut somewhere in medieval Europe? What if instead of central heating, you were met with piercing cold? Instead of running water, a dirty puddle in the yard? And instead of a supermarket, an empty stomach and uncertainty about whether there would be anything to eat today? The Middle Ages is not the romantic era of knights and fair ladies from Hollywood movies. This is a time when survival was a daily struggle, when a simple toothache could become a death sentence and an ordinary cold, a ticket to the grave. This is an era when half of all children died before the age of 5, when people lived in constant fear of hunger, disease, and violence. A modern person, accustomed to antibiotics and anesthesia, to hot water and electricity, to diverse food and medical care, would find themselves in the medieval world like an astronaut without a spacesuit in open space. Every aspect of daily life that we take for granted would become a deadly trap. In this journey, we will spend one day with you in the medieval world, from awakening to going to sleep. We will see how each hour of this day would bring a modern person new trials, new threats, and new reasons for despair. We will understand why our ancestors considered living to 30 years old great luck, and why each new day was not a promise of new opportunities, but another test of survival. Prepare for a journey that will make you look at every modern convenience, every pill in your medicine cabinet, and every sip of clean water from the tap in a new way. Welcome to a world where surviving one day was a real feat. Awakening in the medieval world. The first thing that strikes you upon awakening in a medieval hut is not the absence of an alarm clock or smartphone. It's the acrid smoke that fills the entire space and makes your eyes water before you're fully awake. In the center of the single room burns an open fire in a stone hearth, but there's no proper chimney. Smoke simply rises to the thatched roof and slowly seeps out through cracks. The air is so thick with smoke that breathing becomes painful, and your lungs, accustomed to clean air in modern homes with filtration, begin to protest with coughing fits. But this is just the beginning. Looking around, you realize you're not in a bedroom in the usual sense of the word. This is one room no bigger than a modern closet, where the entire life of a medieval family is concentrated. Here they cook food, eat, work, sleep, and even relieve themselves in bad weather. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a construction that poorly retains heat and lets cold wind through numerous cracks. There are no windows in the usual sense at all. There are only small openings in the walls, which at best are covered with wooden shutters, and more often simply hung with a piece of cloth or straw. Glass is a luxury available only to the very wealthy, and even they have window panes so murky and uneven that you can barely see through them. As a result, the hut is shrouded in semi-darkness even during the day, with the only source of light being that same smoking hearth. The floor under your feet is packed earth covered with a layer of straw that serves simultaneously as insulation, bedding, and absorbent for various liquids. This straw is changed irregularly, and an entire ecosystem of insects, rodents, and parasites lives in it. Fleas, lice, ticks, they all feel at home here, and your appearance in this world means they now have a new food source. But the biggest shock awaits you when you realize that a third of the room is fenced off with a low barrier, behind which domestic animals are kept. Pigs, goats, chickens, and sometimes a cow live in the same space as the family. This is not a whim or peculiarity of planning, it's a necessity. Animals provide warmth on cold nights. They need to be protected from thieves and predators, and their manure serves as additional fuel for the hearth. The smell from this improvised barn mixes with the smoke, creating an atmosphere that would make a modern person immediately leave the premises. There is practically no furniture in the modern understanding. A couple of roughly made stools, a wooden chest that serves simultaneously as storage and table, several clay pots for cooking. That's all the property of an average peasant family. There's no bed as such. People sleep on straw mattresses laid directly on the floor, covering themselves with rough woolen blankets that are rarely washed and teem with parasites. Waking up in such conditions, a modern person would experience real culture shock. The absence of basic amenities that we consider basic needs would turn the first minutes of wakefulness into an endurance test. There's no switch to turn on the light, no faucet with water, no toilet, no heating except for the smoking hearth, no protection from insects and parasites, not even basic privacy. All life passes in view of all family members and domestic animals. And this isn't even the worst part. This is just your dwelling, your base, your home. Ahead lies an entire day in a world where every step could be your last, where every sip of water could bring deadly infection, and every piece of food, if you're lucky enough to find it, could turn out to be spoiled or contaminated. Welcome to the reality of medieval survival. Morning hygiene. The first challenge. Upon waking in the medieval world, you instinctively head to where the bathroom should be, but instead you face harsh reality. There is no toilet in the house. At all. The concept of a separate room for personal hygiene will appear only in several centuries, and for now, all your physiological needs must be satisfied either in a special pit in the yard, or at best in a wooden booth built over a ditch. But even this primitive outhouse is a luxury not available to everyone. Most peasants simply go to the nearest bushes or field, and in bad weather use a pot, the contents of which are then poured directly onto the street or into the nearest ditch. Toilet paper, of course, doesn't exist. Instead, they use leaves, straw, rags, or simply their hand, which is then somehow rinsed with water, if available. Water is the next problem you'll encounter. There's no faucet you can turn to get clean hot water. There's no plumbing, no sewage system, no purification system. Water is taken from a well, if there is one, from the nearest stream or pond, and more often from the same ditch where slops and waste are poured. This water is murky with an unpleasant smell and taste, teeming with bacteria and parasites, but there's no choice. It's the only available liquid. To get this water, you need to go to the source with a heavy wooden bucket, fill it with water, and carry it back. If the well is deep, this requires significant physical effort. You need to turn the winch, lifting a heavy bucket from a depth of dozens of meters. For a modern person accustomed to office work, this is already serious physical exertion, and the day has only just begun. Bringing water is half the battle. Now you need to heat it if you want to wash off at least some of the dirt and sweat. To do this, water must be poured into a metal cauldron or clay pot and placed over the fire. The heating process takes a long time, requires constant fire maintenance, and uses precious fuel, firewood or peat, which must be prepared in advance. When the water finally heats up, you can begin washing. But forget about a hot shower or bath. At best, you have a small basin of warm water in which you can rinse your face and hands. Soap in the modern understanding doesn't exist. Instead, they use an alkaline solution of lime and salt, which dries the skin and can cause irritation or simply rub the skin with a rough cloth. Teeth cleaning is a separate problem. There's no toothpaste, no toothbrush either. Instead, they use twigs of hazel or other trees, which they rub against their teeth, trying to remove plaque. Sometimes they use pieces of woolen cloth soaked in water or wine. The result, to put it mildly, is far from modern oral hygiene standards, and it's no wonder that toothache was one of the most common problems of medieval people. But the most unpleasant reality of medieval hygiene is parasites. Fleas, lice, ticks, worms, they are all constant companions of medieval humans. Fleas live in straw bedding, in clothes, in hair. They bite day and night, causing constant itching and skin irritation. Lice lay eggs in hair and clothing seams, reproducing at incredible speed. Ticks carry various diseases, and intestinal worms, the result of consuming contaminated water and food, cause constant digestive problems. A modern person, accustomed to daily showers, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, deodorant, and other hygiene products, would be defenseless against this army of parasites in the medieval world. Constant itching, unpleasant smell from your own body, dirty hair, sore teeth, all this would become reality in the first hours of being in the medieval world. And this is only morning. Ahead lies an entire day of physical work that will make you sweat and get dirty even more, but there will be no opportunity to wash again. Medieval people washed rarely. Once a week was considered normal, and many did it even less frequently. A full bath was a luxury available only to the rich, and even then, not often. Imagine how you would feel after spending an entire day in dirty clothes that hadn't been washed for weeks, with unwashed hair teeming with parasites, with teeth aching from lack of proper care, and with skin covered in flea and lice bites. And for a medieval person, this was the norm of life, not an exception. Breakfast? The struggle for survival. After the torturous morning hygiene procedures, your stomach begins demanding food, and you head to where a refrigerator would be in a modern home. But there's no refrigerator, no freezer, no kitchen cabinets full of various products, no microwave, toaster, or coffee maker. There are only a few clay pots, a wooden chest, and the constant feeling of hunger that is a faithful companion of medieval humans. Opening the chest, you discover the family's meager supplies: a few pieces of stale bread, a handful of grain, perhaps a piece of cheese covered with mold, and some dried meat if the family was lucky. That's all. No fruits, vegetables, milk, eggs, or other products that modern humans consider the basis of healthy nutrition. The diet of a medieval peasant is monotonous, meager, and often insufficient to maintain normal health. The basis of nutrition is bread, but not the soft, white bread we're used to. Medieval bread for common people is baked from barley, rye, or oats, grains considered food for the poor. Wheat bread is a privilege of the rich. This bread is coarse, dense, often with impurities, stones, straw could get into the flour, and in hungry times even wood shavings or acorns. Bread quickly becomes stale and moldy, but you can't throw it away. It might be the only food for several days. To prepare even the simplest breakfast, you need to light a fire in the hearth. This isn't as simple as turning a gas stove handle or pressing an electric button. You need to find dry kindling, strike a spark with flint and steel, blow the fire, add firewood. In wet weather, this can take an hour or more, and sometimes the fire doesn't catch at all. Without fire, there's no hot food, no boiled water, no heat in the house. If you manage to light the fire, you can prepare porridge, the main dish of a medieval breakfast. Water is poured into a cauldron, grain is added, barley, oats, or rye, and cooked over slow fire. No spices, salt, or sugar. The porridge turns out bland, tasteless, but nutritious. Sometimes a little lard or pieces of dried meat are added if available, but more often it's just boiled grain in water. Milk is a rarity in a peasant home. Not every family has a cow, and if they do, milk quickly sours without refrigeration. Moreover, most adult medieval people suffer from lactose intolerance. The ability to digest milk in adulthood was rare. Fresh vegetables and fruits are available only in season, and not always. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn haven't been brought from America yet. Citrus fruits are exotic, available only to the very wealthy. But the most terrible reality of medieval nutrition is the constant threat of famine. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 claimed the lives of millions of people across Europe. People ate tree bark, grass, even earth, trying to fill their stomachs. Mothers killed their children to eat their flesh. Cannibalism became a survival norm. Even in ordinary years, most peasants lived on the brink of starvation. In winter and spring, when last year's harvest supplies ran out and the new one hadn't ripened yet, came the time called hungry months. People lost weight, weakened, became easy prey for diseases. Child mortality during these periods increased sharply. Food quality also left much to be desired. Without refrigerators and preservatives, products spoiled quickly. Meat and fish were salted or smoked, but often still became sources of food poisoning. Grain could be infected with ergot, a fungus causing hallucinations and death. Water from polluted sources brought dysentery and other intestinal infections. A modern person, accustomed to diverse nutrition, vitamins, fresh products, and regular meals, would face constant malnutrition in the medieval world. Vitamin deficiency, anemia, rickets, all these diseases were common companions of medieval life. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C, night blindness from lack of vitamin A, rickets from lack of vitamin D, all this was normal, not exceptional. Breakfast in the medieval world is not a pleasant start to the day, but a struggle for survival. Every piece of bread might be the last, every spoonful of porridge, salvation from starvation. And this is only morning. Ahead lies an entire day of hard work on a meager diet, without snacks, without variety, without certainty that there will be something to eat tomorrow. Work, physical ordeal. After the meager breakfast comes work time, and here a modern person would face a reality that would shatter all their ideas about labor rights and working conditions. Forget about 8-hour workdays, weekends, vacations, sick leave, and labor codes. In the medieval world, people work from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The only breaks are church holidays, and not all of them free you from work. If you're a peasant, and 90% of medieval Europe's population were peasants, your work consists of cultivating land with primitive tools that a modern person would see only in a museum. A plow is not a powerful tractor, but a wooden construction with an iron tip pulled by an emaciated ox or horse, if you're lucky to have them. More often, you have to plow by hand using a hoe or spade. Imagine that you, accustomed to office work at a computer, suddenly have to dig earth all day with a heavy iron hoe. Your hands, which have never known calluses, will be covered with blisters within an hour. Your back, used to an ergonomic office chair, will start aching after half an hour of constant bending. Your feet, familiar only with walks on asphalt, will sink in mud and stumble over stones and roots. But this is just the beginning. The land needs to be not just dug up, it needs to be loosened, leveled, sown with grain, and then constantly tended. Weeds need to be pulled by hand, bent over the earth under the scorching sun or in the rain. There are no herbicides, no mechanized cultivators, only your hands, back, and endless rows of plants. When harvest time comes, the work becomes even harder. Grain needs to be cut with a sickle, a curved blade on a short handle that requires constant bending and sharp movements. A modern person, unaccustomed to such work, would get muscle strain within an hour and a serious back injury within a day. But you can't stop. The harvest needs to be gathered quickly before weather spoils it or pests eat it. Cut grain needs to be tied into sheaves, carried to the threshing place, and then threshed with flails, heavy wooden sticks connected by leather straps. This is monotonous, exhausting work that continues from morning to evening. Dust from straw clogs the lungs, hands are covered with cuts from sharp stems, and constant flail strikes echo as pain in shoulders and elbows. But agricultural work isn't just fields. You need to care for animals if you have them. A cow needs to be milked twice a day, pigs fed and cleaned up after, chickens herded at night, and eggs collected. Each animal requires constant attention, and the illness or death of livestock could mean a hungry winter for the entire family. In winter, when fieldwork stops, other types of labor begin. You need to prepare firewood for heating, cut trees with a dull axe, saw them with a handsaw, split them into logs, and stack them in wood piles. A modern person, accustomed to central heating, can't imagine how much firewood is needed to heat a house all winter. It's tons of wood, every log of which needs to be cut, sawed, and split by hand. Women in the medieval world worked no less than men. They spun wool, wove fabrics, sewed clothes, cooked food, cared for children, milked cows, fed chickens, worked in the garden. All this without washing machines, sewing machines, gas stoves, and other modern conveniences. Every shirt was sewn by hand, every piece of fabric woven on a primitive loom. Every laundry meant hours of work by the river with harsh soap and heavy clothing. The medieval person's workday began with the first rays of sun and ended only when it became too dark to work. No coffee breaks, lunch hours, or weekends. The sick and healthy worked, young and old, pregnant women and children. A child began working as soon as they could hold simple tools, usually at age 5 or 6. Working conditions were extremely dangerous. Sharp tools, heavy loads, working at heights, contact with sick animals, all this led to frequent injuries and accidents. A cut from a sickle could lead to blood poisoning and death. A fall from a roof while repairing a thatched roof to fractures and disability. A horse's kick to traumatic brain injury. A modern person, accustomed to safety regulations, health insurance, and sick leave, would be defenseless against these dangers in the medieval world. Any injury could become fatal, any illness, the end of working ability. And without work in the medieval world, there's no food, no shelter, no life. And all this for the right to live in a smoky hut, eat stale bread, and hope that the next harvest won't die from drought or flood. Modern concepts of career growth, self-realization, or dream jobs simply didn't exist in the medieval world. Work wasn't a way to earn a living, but a way to survive another day. Medicine. Playing with death. If heavy physical work hasn't killed you by midday, health problems in the medieval world would become your next and possibly final trial. A modern person, accustomed to antibiotics, anesthesia, surgery, and emergency care, would find themselves in the medieval world like an astronaut without a spacesuit. Every illness, every injury, every infection could become a death sentence. Let's start with the most terrifying fact. Child mortality in medieval Europe was about 50%. This means every second child died before reaching age 5. The causes were diverse: infections, diarrhea, pneumonia, measles, smallpox, diphtheria. Diseases that today are treated with simple antibiotics or prevented by vaccination were then killers number one. If you managed to survive to adulthood, this still didn't guarantee a long life. Average life expectancy was about 30 to 35 years, and this includes those who died in infancy. Even excluding child mortality, adults rarely lived to 50. Living to 60 was considered exceptional luck, and 70-year-old elders were true long livers, revered as living relics. Top health problems that would turn a modern person's life in the medieval world into a nightmare. Intestinal infections and dysentery take first place. Contaminated water, lack of sewage systems, unsanitary food preparation conditions. All this led to constant stomach and intestinal problems. Diarrhea wasn't just an inconvenience, but a frequent cause of death, especially among children and elderly. Second place, respiratory diseases. Pneumonia, bronchitis, tuberculosis thrived in conditions of cold, damp dwellings, poor nutrition, and weakened immunity. Constant inhalation of smoke from hearths aggravated lung problems. Tuberculosis was so widespread it was called White Death. Third place, infectious skin diseases. Scabies, eczema, various fungal infections thrived in conditions of poor hygiene. Simple cuts and scratches often turned into purulent wounds due to lack of antiseptics. Gangrene was a frequent complication of even minor injuries. Fourth place, parasitic diseases. Intestinal worms, lice, fleas, ticks, they all not only caused discomfort but also carried serious diseases. Malaria, transmitted by mosquitoes, was common even in northern regions of Europe. Fifth place, dental problems. Without toothbrushes, paste, and dentists, teeth quickly deteriorated. Cavities, periodontitis, abscesses were commonplace. Toothache could drive someone to suicide, and infection from a bad tooth often led to sepsis and death. Medieval medicine was a mixture of superstitions, religious beliefs, and primitive knowledge about the human body. The main treatment methods were bloodletting, bowel cleansing, prayers, and incantations. Doctors believed in the theory of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow, and black bile, and considered diseases to arise from their imbalance. Surgery was extremely primitive and dangerous. Operations were performed without anesthesia, using non-sterile instruments. Most patients died from shock or post-operative infections. Amputations were performed with a red-hot iron to cauterize vessels, causing unbearable pain. A modern person, accustomed to aspirin for headaches, antibiotics for infections, and emergency care for injuries, would be completely defenseless in the medieval world. A simple cold could develop into deadly pneumonia. A finger cut into gangrene and amputation. A toothache into sepsis and death. And this doesn't even account for epidemics, the Black Death, smallpox, cholera, typhus that periodically decimated entire cities and regions. When an epidemic came to a village, 1 in 3 survived if lucky. The rest died in terrible agony, without treatment, without hope, often in complete solitude as even relatives feared approaching the sick. Social system, a trap with no exit. The feudal system worked like a giant pyramid. At the top was the king, below, dukes and counts, even lower, barons and knights, and at the very bottom, peasants, comprising 90% of the population. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant, as would your children and your children's children. Social elevators didn't work, they simply didn't exist. Serfdom turned a person into property of the land. You couldn't leave the village without the lord's permission. Couldn't marry without his consent. Couldn't engage in trade or crafts. couldn't even die peacefully. After death, the Lord took the best livestock or tool as death duty. You were tied to the land more firmly than the trees that grew on it. A modern person, accustomed to freedom of movement, choice of profession and residence, would find themselves in the position of a slave in the medieval world. Want to move to another city? Forget it. You belong to this land. Want to learn a new profession? Impossible. You're a peasant and your job is to plow the earth. Want to give your children education? Ridiculous. Literacy isn't for your class. The tax burden was crushing. Peasants paid tithe to the church, a tenth of the harvest. Paid taxes to the Lord, another third or half of what remained. Paid for using the mill, bakery, forge. Paid for the right to graze cattle, catch fish, gather brushwood in the forest. Paid for weddings, funerals, baptisms. In the end, a peasant family had barely enough left for survival. The legal system was cruel and unjust. For stealing bread, they cut off your hand. For repeat theft, they hanged you. For poaching in Lord's forest, they blinded or castrated you. For non-payment of taxes, they threw you in prison where you could rot alive. Justice was administered by the same lords who established the laws, and fairness was not to be expected. Women's position was especially difficult. They had no right to own property, couldn't inherit land, couldn't testify in court. A woman passed from father's property to husband's property, and after his death, to the eldest son's property. Domestic violence was the norm, not the exception. Rape of a peasant woman by a lord wasn't considered a crime. Education was a privilege of clergy and high nobility. More than 95% of the population was illiterate. Books were rare and cost a fortune. One book could cost as much as a cow or horse. Knowledge was transmitted orally, leading to distortion and loss. Scientific progress was practically absent. The church controlled not only spiritual but also secular life. It determined what you could eat and when, whom you could sleep with, and in what positions, what you could think and say. The Inquisition hunted heretics, witches, and freethinkers. Any deviation from church dogma was punished by excommunication, torture, or death. Wars were a constant disaster. Lords fought each other for lands, kings for thrones, crusaders for the Holy Land. Peasants paid for everything. They were conscripted into militias, their fields were trampled by armies, their homes burned by enemies. War meant hunger, disease, death, and destruction. Even in peacetime, life was full of dangers. Robbers attacked on roads, wolves attacked livestock and people, fires destroyed entire villages. There was no police, fire service, or rescue service. Everyone survived as they could, relying only on themselves and their neighbors. Old age in the medieval world was not a golden time of deserved rest, but a period of poverty and helplessness. Pensions didn't exist, neither did Social Security. Old people depended on the mercy of children or community. Many ended their lives as beggars, asking for alms at churches. But the most terrible thing about the medieval social system wasn't the absence of freedoms or cruelty of laws. The most terrible thing was that people considered this normal, godly, the natural order of things. They didn't dream of a better life because they didn't know it was possible. They didn't fight for their rights because they didn't know such rights existed. You would be trapped not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And this, perhaps, would be the heaviest trial of all, understanding that there was no way out, that it was this way, is this way, and will always be this way. Evening and night, new dangers. When the sun begins to set on the horizon, a modern person in the medieval world would understand that the day's trials were merely a prelude to the nightmare of night. In a world without electricity, street lighting, and central heating, the onset of darkness meant not rest after a day's work, but the beginning of a new struggle for survival. The first problem is lighting. Forget about flicking a switch and flooding the room with bright light. In a medieval home, light sources were extremely limited and expensive. Candles were a luxury available only to the rich. They were made from beeswax or animal fat and cost a fortune. Most peasants used splinters, thin chips of resinous wood that gave dim, flickering light and burned quickly. Oil lamps were also rare. Oil was expensive, and the lamp itself required constant care. More often, the only light source was the fire in the hearth, which gave more smoke than light. As a result, with the onset of darkness, the house plunged into semi-darkness where you could only distinguish vague silhouettes. A modern person, accustomed to bright lamps, television, and computer screens, would be practically blind in a medieval home. Attempting to move in such darkness would inevitably lead to injuries, bruises against furniture, falls, cuts on sharp objects. And any injury in the medieval world, as we already know, could become fatal. The second problem is cold. Without central heating, double glazed windows, and insulated walls, a medieval house quickly cooled with sunset. The only heat source was the hearth, but its warmth spread only a few meters around. In the corners of the house, temperature could drop to freezing even on not-so-cold nights. A modern person, accustomed to comfortable temperatures of 68 to 72 degrees Celsius year-round, would face temperatures of 41 to 50 degrees at best in a medieval house. Sleeping in such conditions would be practically impossible. People went to bed fully clothed, covered themselves with all available clothing and fabrics, and sometimes even took domestic animals to bed for additional warmth. But cold wasn't just discomfort, it was a killer. Hypothermia, frostbite, pneumonia from cold claimed thousands of lives every winter. The elderly and children were especially vulnerable. Many simply didn't wake up after particularly cold nights. The third problem is security. In a world without police, security systems, and street lighting, night was a time of robbers, thieves, and murderers. Wooden doors with primitive locks couldn't stop a determined robber. Windows without glass and bars were open invitations for thieves. But danger came not only from people. Wolves, bears, and other predators in hungry times approached human dwellings in search of food. Packs of hungry wolves could attack a house, especially if they smelled domestic animals. Thin walls of wattle and daub couldn't stop a large predator. The fourth problem is fires. In a house where the only sources of light and heat were open fire and burning splinters, fire was a constant threat. Thatched roof, wooden walls, dry bedding on the floor, all this was perfect fuel for fire. One fallen spark, one overturned lamp, and the house turned into a torch in minutes. Fires in medieval villages were catastrophic. Houses stood close to each other, all built from combustible materials. There was no fire service. Fire could destroy an entire village in one night, leaving people without shelter, possessions, and food in the middle of winter. Night in the medieval world was a time when all daytime problems were aggravated and new dangers multiplied. It was a time when people felt most vulnerable, when death seemed especially close, when every sound could mean approaching trouble. A modern person, accustomed to safe, warm, lit nights, would understand in the medieval world that surviving until dawn was already a victory and waking up alive and healthy was a real miracle. Conclusion: return to modernity. Having survived this nightmarish day in the medieval world, you wake up in your modern bed. The first thing you feel is incredible relief that this was just a mental experiment. The second is deep gratitude for every modern convenience you previously took for granted. You get up and go to the bathroom. Turn the faucet, clean hot water flows from it. This is a miracle for which a medieval person would have given half their life. You brush your teeth with fluoride toothpaste that protects your teeth from cavities, a disease that was the curse of medieval people. Take a hot shower with fragrant gel, washing away not only dirt but also imaginary fleas, lice, and other parasites of the medieval world. You open the refrigerator and see abundance that would seem like a divine vision to a medieval peasant. Fresh fruits and vegetables year-round, dairy products, meat, fish, juices, yogurts, all available at any time. You eat breakfast without thinking about whether you'll have dinner, without fearing hunger, without counting every crumb. You go to work in heated transportation, work in a comfortable office with air conditioning, lighting, and ergonomic furniture. Your work doesn't threaten your life, doesn't break your back, doesn't cover your hands with calluses and cuts. You have weekends, vacation, sick leave, concepts that were unthinkable in the medieval world. If you get sick, you go to a doctor who can make an accurate diagnosis, prescribe effective treatment, perform surgery under anesthesia. You have antibiotics against infections, painkillers against pain, vaccines against deadly diseases. A simple aspirin tablet solves a problem that could have killed a medieval person. You live in a world where child mortality is less than 1%, where average life expectancy exceeds 80 years, where most diseases are curable or preventable. You live in a society where there is social mobility, where you can change your fate, where human rights are protected by law. In the evening, you return home, turn on the light with one finger movement, set a comfortable temperature, cook dinner on a modern stove. You can read books, watch movies, communicate with people around the world via the internet. You go to sleep in a warm, clean bed, not fearing robbers, predators, or fires. But most importantly, you live in a world of hope. You know that tomorrow can be better than today. You can dream, plan, strive for goals. You're not trapped in a closed circle of survival like your medieval ancestors. This mental experiment shows us how far humanity has advanced in recent centuries. Every modern convenience is the result of millennia of development, accumulation of knowledge, struggle against ignorance and superstition. Plumbing, electricity, medicine, education, human rights, all these are achievements of civilization that shouldn't be taken for granted. The modern world isn't perfect. We have our problems, environmental crises, social inequality, political conflicts, but even the most serious problems of modernity pale before the daily horrors of medieval life. We live in an era that would have been paradise for our ancestors. Next time you complain about slow internet, cold coffee, or traffic jams, remember the medieval peasant who dreamed of simply living to see the next day. When you're dissatisfied with your job, remember the person who plowed the earth from dawn to dusk without weekends and vacations. When you're irritated by a queue at the clinic, remember times when medical help didn't exist at all. We live in an amazing time. A time when a person can live a long, healthy, comfortable life. A time when knowledge is available to all, when you can travel the world, when technologies make the impossible possible. This is a time our ancestors could only dream of. Value what you have. Every day of your modern life is a gift made possible by the efforts of millions of people over centuries. You won the lottery of history, being born in an era when surviving one day is not a feat and living a long life is not a miracle, but the norm. And remember, progress hasn't stopped. Future generations may look at our era the way we look at the Middle Ages. They'll wonder how we could live without technologies that will be commonplace for them. Human history is a story of constant movement forward, and we are part of this great journey from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge, from survival to prosperity.